This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Stick around to learn more. Monster Hunter Tri released in the year 2009 for the Nintendo Wii. This game introduced a brand new mechanic to the series, underwater combat. For the first time ever, players could dive down and explore the ocean and fight the monsters that live there. These include the Leviathans, a brand new monster type introduced in this game. Leviathans have long bodies, 4 legs and a tail. They are amphibious and can fight on the land or the sea. Notable Leviathans throughout the series include Mizutsune, Royal Ludroth, Almudron, Agnacta, and of course Lagiacrus, the flagship of this game. Lagiacrus is a teal-coloured Leviathan with orange spikes, and is the first Thunder Element flagship monster. He is also the only flagship monster capable of fighting underwater, and this has led to a very complex history. In this video, we will explore how he was in Monster Hunter Tri, his appearances in later games, his current status, and his future. Lagiacrus in Monster Hunter Tri is introduced to players through a surprise encounter. You are given a quest to collect monster guts from the docile smaller leviathans known as Epioth. While hunting them down in the underwater zones of the deserted island, you are greeted to him. Introducing flagships through surprise encounters is not a new thing. Tigrex also infamously appeared in a Popo hunting quest, but what makes this one unique is that you encounter Lagiacrus underwater, a completely unfamiliar territory to you, the hunter, but his home turf. Nowadays, invading flagships in recent Monster Hunter games are expected, since it happens a lot. Some of us can even kill them before we're supposed to. But what makes the Lagiacrus encounter especially unique is that absolutely nobody was familiar with underwater combat when encountering him, as this was the first ever game to have this feature. We, the hunters, are inexperienced, while he, the Lord of the Seas, is right home here in his domain. So we have no choice but to run, since there's no hope of taking him out. The next few monsters you encounter are not as threatening as him, which makes you look forward to your eventual rematch as you train up, get better, and familiarise yourself with the combat, both on land and beneath the sea. Eventually, you face off with him in a repel quest. Lagiacrus has 2 movesets, one for the land and one for underwater. On land, Lagiacrus can shoot thunderball projectiles. He can swing his head around, curling up to send his tail swinging behind him, which is an attack shared with other Leviathans. He can slam his body into the ground and zoom at you. Simply moving up against you will deal damage, and he has a double bite at close range too. He also has a hip check which, with his size, can be hard to avoid. His land moveset can be tricky to deal with, but is overall manageable. This quest is to repel him, and he escapes into the ocean. Your next and final meeting begins underwater, where Lagiacrus shows his true strength. His land moveset was dangerous but basic, and experienced hunters could run circles around him. But down in the sea, this is Lagiacrus' domain. He has complete control and swims around gracefully, a stark contrast to his land waddle. When underwater, he can flick his tail at you from below. He can chain thunderballs together, and he has underwater variations of his land attacks. They end up being far more dangerous down here, because they have the opportunity to hit at more angles, plus Lagiacrus can execute them faster. The biggest addition underwater though, is the ability to make use of his shell shockers. Those spikes on his back can be charged with electricity only in the ocean, and when this happens, not only are his existing attacks charged with electricity, but he can perform powerful area of effect blasts that force you away. This, combined with his mobility increase, can make him a genuine challenge. We do have an advantage against him though. On land, hitting his shell shockers is only possible when we knock him to the ground, since they're too high on his back. Underwater combat allows for 360-degree movement. This means that when underwater, we can simply swim up to them and get free hits. Breaking them completely will disable the thunder attacks, so it's a big target. In a recent video I made on Shigaru Magala, I discussed why Gore Magala was more interesting than him, because Gore Magala essentially had 2 movesets that he rotated between throughout his fight, one of them more dangerous than the other. Gore is the first monster to have 2 distinct movesets, but Zinogre also does something like this, having a charged up state that unlocks new attacks, extends combos, and alters existing ones. However, Lagiacrus and other amphibious monsters precede even him. While many of the underwater attacks are identical to the land ones, they also have some new additions, and being in a 360-degree plane really changes them and makes them harder. And this is not helped by our limited underwater abilities. It's as if we fight on land for a period of time, only for the monster to say, okay, now we fight on my terms, and the whole dynamic of the fight changes. Lagiacrus is something of a foil to Rathalos, the series mascot. Both are flagship monsters. Rathalos is known as the King of the Skies, while Lagiacrus is known as the Lord of the Seas. Rathalos uses fire and is weak to thunder, while Lagiacrus uses thunder and is weak to fire. Neither of them have their own theme songs either. All these factors combined make Lagiacrus a very special monster to fans. Tri sold over 1 million copies. The series was formerly PlayStation exclusive, so Tri brought in a lot of new fans. They gained fond memories of encountering Lagiacrus as their first monster and growing stronger to eventually overcome him. This is similar to how many World fans have fond memories of Nergigante. 4 Ultimate fans like myself love Gormagala and Soregios, and people who began with Rise will also hold Magnamalo to a similar standard. Roughly a year or so later, Monster Hunter Portable 3rd released for the PSP in Japan. This was an original game that reused maps and monsters from Tri, but a huge difference was that it didn't have underwater combat, being land only like every other game. The water areas of the deserted island are closed off, and the flooded forest has been dried up. The result of this is that some monsters from Tri were absent from Portable 3rd, and these are Sadius, Gobel, and Lagiacrus. Now cutting Sadius makes a lot of sense. He's exclusively underwater, and there's no way to rework him into the opposite terrain. Gobel is capable of going on land, but he barely functions there. He's so slow, and his attacks are really predictable. This is by design, since Gobel will only willingly go on land to change areas, or if he's exhausted. In fact, you can even force him on land by fishing him out of the water with a frog, which makes his land state a reward for players who came prepared. The game clearly considers Gobel's land moveset to be a weakened state. This is generally true of Lagiacrus as well. He won't really leave the water areas of the deserted island unless he absolutely has to. At most, he will venture as far as Area 5. He is more of a water monster than a land one. Despite this, his land moveset was not nearly as reduced as Gobel's. Could Lagiacrus have still been a worthwhile fight without underwater combat? The Royal Ludroth made it into Portable 3rd, and he's a Leviathan capable of water combat, which makes Lagiacrus's cut feel stranger. Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate came out a short while later for the 3DS and Wii U. This game is essentially Monster Hunter Tri, but incorporating content from Portable 3rd, and with new G-Rank content. Lagiacrus, Gobel and Sadius are all back, with Lagiacrus getting both a subspecies and a rare species. Ivory Lagiacrus is a subspecies, a white coloured Leviathan with blue spikes. He's a lot bigger than a standard Lagiacrus, and has a very key difference. Ivory is much more adapted to land, and spends much more time there than underwater, only going there if he absolutely has to. Ivory has heavily enhanced thunder abilities, so by default, his attacks are stronger and cover a wider area. His immense size also makes his physical attacks more threatening too. But the biggest change is that he can now utilise his shell shockers on land, meaning all those deadly thunder attacks can be performed anywhere. Now add to the fact that we don't get as many opportunities to target his shell shockers, this is definitely a harder Lagiacrus experience. Ivory is classified as a subspecies, but in practice he is technically a variant. He is a Lagiacrus in a later stage of life that has ventured out onto land and expanded his territory. He also hangs out in areas of the deserted island that Lagiacrus would not visit. The rare species is Abyssal Lagiacrus, a G-Rank post-game monster that resides in the same area you fight Sadius in. He is dark blue, and his shell shockers are always active, causing his entire body to glow with electricity. This is an even older Lagiacrus, and has grown so big that he can't live on land anymore, now being exclusively underwater. The result of this is that he's an amped up underwater Lagiacrus fight. All his thunder attacks are massively enhanced. He is even bigger than Ivory, which makes his physical attacks possess even more danger. He also has the ability to create 3 large whirlpools that last for a few minutes and can drain your stamina upon contact. All this with the fact you need high sharpness to not bounce off him, he's a pretty difficult fight. So now we have 3 different Lagiacrus variations in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. the standard Lagiacrus, who resides mostly in the water, occasionally going on land. We have the Ivory Lagiacrus, who resides mostly on land, occasionally going into the water, and the Abyssal Lagiacrus, who resides entirely underwater. It would seem that no matter which type, the sea always plays a big role in Lagiacrus's fight. Even Ivory, who stays mostly on land, is more than willing to get down below if he absolutely needs to, and ends up being even harder than the standard Lagiacrus due to his size. Now, as we all know, underwater combat was last seen in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, and as of this video has not returned. But what of Lagiacrus? Monster Hunter 4 and its expansion, released exclusively for the Nintendo 3DS, and underwater combat was cut entirely, with the game instead focusing on verticality, boosting the hunter's movement capabilities above land. Lagiacrus and Leviathans as a whole were absent for this entry. Sometime later, Monster Hunter Generations was released. This game was made to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Monster Hunter, and so it tried to cram in as many monsters as possible. This is the game where Lagiacrus, and only Lagiacrus, made his latest appearance. Like 4, underwater combat is not a thing in this game. The deserted island is back, reusing its portable third form. So for the first time ever, Lagiacrus is land only. How does he fight in this game? Well... So yeah, it seems they took Ivory Lagiacrus' moveset and expanded it. Lagiacrus can now also use his shell shockers on land, and this means he fights just like Ivory. The Generations developers also gave him some new variations of the Thunder area of effect that can now act in different ways, such as these rotating thunderballs. He also has a physical attack in the form of this lightning bite. Since Lagiacrus is no longer limited to areas with underwater zones, he can now show up in the Misty Peaks and the jungle. In the deserted island, he also hangs out in the same areas Ivory can go, whereas in Tri he would only hang out in 4 different areas. Overall, this iteration is very dull, repetitive. He spends most of the fight roaring while blasting thunder around him while you stand there waiting for it to be over. Am I fighting Lagiacrus, the Lord of the Seas, or am I fighting an oversized Kezu? If you're wondering why Royal Ludroth was included in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd, despite him and Lagiacrus both being underwater capable, it's because they both share similar land movesets. They can both bite, spit projectiles, zoom around and swing their tails. In fact, Royal Ludroth tends to be more capable on land than Lagiacrus is, and spends way more time there willingly. His land-based abilities match his threat level, so having him in a land-based game makes sense. When you fight Lagiacrus on land, not only are you stronger, not only are you faster, you're better. You can run circles around him, and there's not much he can do to get you. This dynamic changes when you're underwater. This is his domain. He is completely adapted for water combat, and you aren't. So now you're at a huge disadvantage, and you have to prove that you're stronger than he is. The truth is that Lagiacrus' land moveset is just quite weak, and putting him unaltered, with only his land attacks in Portable 3rd, would not have made him very interesting. Now they did manage to make a land-based Lagiacrus in the form of Ivory by giving him enhanced thunder attacks. You might be able to run circles around a normal Lagiacrus, but good luck doing that when you can't even hit the damn thing. His thunder projectiles really keep you on the run, and his added size makes his physical attacks deadlier. Abyssal Lagiacrus, funnily enough, is not too hard. He has a lot of health and can trap you in some pretty nasty combos, but the underwater ruins are quite large, so there's lots of room to get around. So now we look at GU Lagiacrus. Why is this one bad? Well, remember that Lagiacrus' land moveset, while a bit tricky, was overall pretty basic. The real threat was fighting him underwater, and Monster Hunter Tri knew this. That is why they threw you up against underwater Lagiacrus in the Gathering quest. It's why the Repel quest was exclusively on land, and why he was guaranteed to start off underwater in his urgent quest. This was the real danger of Lagiacrus, and the game adequately set it up. So when you have an exclusively land-based version, he's inevitably going to be as dangerous as a Royal Ludroth. So they have to compensate, and they did. But all these thunder attacks make him really boring to fight. All he does is blast huge area of effect attacks that can be completely negated with Valor style. He does have his physical attacks, but keep in mind that Agnacta is also in this game, as well as the Royal Ludroth. They both share the vast majority of his physical attacks, which makes Lagiacrus feel much less unique. In the past, I have gone as far as to call Generations Lagiacrus Kezu with music. Now you might be thinking, don't these criticisms apply to the Ivory Lagiacrus as well? After all, he spends most of his time on land, blasting thunder attacks everywhere. Isn't he bad too? The main difference is that Ivory is one of 3 different Lagiacrus variations in 3 Ultimate. You have the Standard, who is mostly underwater, and the Ivory, who is mostly on land. This effectively makes him a different Lagiacrus experience, but not the main one. The 2 variations contrast with each other and complement each other very well, with Lagiacrus posing danger underwater, and Ivory threatening you on land, and Abyssal showing you just how strong a fully charged underwater Lagiacrus can be. In Generations, this is the only Lagiacrus in the game, meaning this is the Lagiacrus experience we are presented with, a land-based version that uses even more thunder attacks than Ivory that don't really make him interesting, just annoying, overall leading to an unsatisfying experience. Lagiacrus needs water in order to not only be dangerous, but also interesting, because he was designed with this in mind, and every iteration prior to Generations featured it in some way. Without it, he is simply a standard Leviathan with Kezu abilities, and until underwater combat returns, Lagiacrus will never be restored to his former glory. The last appearance of Lagiacrus was in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. He was planned for Monster Hunter World, even being nearly functional as seen in this pre-release footage. However, he had some technical issues. Monster Hunter World's maps had varied terrain, featuring hills and slopes, and according to the development team, Lagiacrus' body had trouble adapting without tons of performance issues. This is due to the way World handles monster collision, with their body parts dynamically shifting to be on the ground. Lagiacrus and Leviathans in general simply couldn't do it, so they were cut from this game. Monster Hunter Rise featured the return of Leviathan's Royal Ludroth and Mizutsune, but also introduced newcomers Almudron and Somnacanth. With the maps being exceptionally flat in Rise, it seems like the issues have been fixed. Well, it turns out no, Lagiacrus is quite unique in that he still doesn't function properly. If you look at how he moves, he drags his belly and tail along the ground, meaning all of that and his legs have to adapt to the terrain. Royal Ludroth is smaller, so he doesn't suffer from this problem. Mizutsune and Almudron's bodies are raised above the ground, so they avoid it too. Somnacanth either rests on her tail or is submerged in water, and even on land she has a very thin frame, so she doesn't experience the issues either. So that's the current state of Lagiacrus. We can't fight him underwater, and he can't even function on land. So he and Gammoth are the only flagships not present in the 5th generation of Monster Hunter. Now, assuming this technical issue is fixed in the next game, we will definitely see Lagiacrus again, especially since we know they tried adding him 3 times in a row. He is beloved by the fans, so it's only a matter of time. The question is, do we want him without underwater combat? After all, underwater is where Lagiacrus shines the brightest. He was made to demonstrate the potential of this brand new system, and he did it very well. Without underwater, he is simply a slightly harder version of other Leviathans. In fact, compared to Mizutsune, Almudron and Aurora Somnacanth, Lagiacrus on land is just a far less interesting Leviathan. Generations gave him new abilities to try and spice him up, but all they did was just make him boring and unfun to fight. Now, to be fair to Generations, it had a limited development time and was trying to fit in a lot of monsters. It's possible a land-based Lagiacrus, given adequate development time and resources, could be a fantastic fight. However, after playing through not only Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, but the original Monster Hunter Tri, I sincerely believe underwater combat is critical to Lagiacrus' identity. It is what made him unique compared to the other monsters, and it is why he's so beloved to this day. So the best way to bring him back would be with the reintroduction of underwater combat. Which begs the question, Should underwater combat return? There were pros and cons to this system in Tri and 3 Ultimate, and there will be even more of each in a modern game. Discussing the topic requires its own video in my opinion, so let's leave it here for now. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of different classes for people who want to learn new skills and explore their creativity. It's a fantastic resource for growing your skills and learning new things. There are so many courses to explore on things like photography, music, web development, all kinds of things that can help you grow as a person or learn useful skills to advance your career prospects. I myself found great value from Skillshare courses. I started YouTube around a year ago, and believe it or not, I had no idea how to edit videos. I just learned as I went along, and while I would say I'm pretty good now, there is still a ton of stuff I don't know. Going through this course by Oliver Astrologo on DaVinci Resolve post-production really helped me learn more about advanced editing techniques I would never have figured out on my own. There's a ton of other courses on DaVinci Resolve as well as other video editing software, so there's still plenty for me to learn on this, but also you, the viewer. By clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment, the first 1,000 people will have 1 month of access to Skillshare Premium. This will allow you to access any course you want on the site and thus grow your skills and learn new things. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I hope you'll all take it. Lagiacrus was the flagship monster of Monster Hunter Tri, the game that introduced underwater combat. He was designed to show off this feature, and the result of this was that he was far more dangerous there than on land. While he was a fantastic and unique fight in that game because of underwater combat, it proved a problem for games where the feature was absent, with Portable 3rd excluding him, and Generations featuring a much less interesting version based on the Ivory Lagiacrus. While Ivory was great in 3 Ultimate, it was because he contrasted with the base form, serving as a polar opposite. Despite mainly residing on land, he could still fight underwater if the situation called for it, meaning he was never completely detached from the sea. On his own, he wouldn't be so interesting, but as an alternate experience of the base form, he was a great addition. Abyssal is completely underwater. Being a Lagiacrus at the later stages of its life, it proves that the species truly belongs underwater, and will ultimately never be complete without it. He is a monster designed for that style of combat to show it off. Lagiacrus needs underwater combat to be a good, unique, satisfying fight. The history of Lagiacrus is also the history of underwater combat, and you can't really talk about one without the other. If Lagiacrus is going to return for a future game, in all his glory, then underwater combat has to come with him. But whether or not reintroducing underwater combat is a good idea is certainly another discussion to be had at a later date. Thank you for watching this video. This was supposed to be an evolution video, but it evolved into its own kind of thing. Remember to like this video, subscribe to my channel, donate to me on Patreon for early access videos, and have a good day.